my friends, I'm Rick, and hey, it's another day, right? I keep asking I keep hearing a lot of this. I watch a lot of YouTube videos that a lot of the YouTube stuff I got are 10, 15-minute segments that are cut offs of the main media stuff, media channels, and they post things on the internet. So I get stuff from CNN, from US, MSBN or whatever the hell it is, from Fox News, from the CBS people, you know. The BBC, and from Associated Press, and then a whole lot of secondary sources and stuff, but it's basically the same things. And when they talk about what motivates a lot of the MAGA crowd today, and why they seem to be so damn detached and so determined to ignore the realities of the world and cling to such a fantasy that Trump spun for them. Even though the majority of us look at Trump and the crap he spews out and go, how? How did you fall for this guy? How could you fall so devotedly for this guy? You're going to corrupt your own immortal soul by going against everything Jesus taught. And we were taught from the Bible to follow this MAGA crowd movement. That's how dangerous this guy is. And you don't see it, my friends. You don't see it. This picture here is a picture of my grandparents' backyard. So when I was a kid, I spent a lot of time with my grandparents. And this would be on the far east side of Des Moines, Iowa. That's the state capital for Iowa, in case you need a little education in the geography department. So, back then, my grandparents were young people when the Depression was in full force. And so they fully understood deprivation and not having enough of anything. They fully understood this. And then, as very young adults, World War II happens, and the war happens almost 6 years. For us it started in 42 and 43. When reality had been going on since 38, but America hadn't gotten involved for a couple of years. But the effects of slowly dragging ourselves out of an extreme depression, and then the rapid, massive onslaught of capital and investment that takes place in 39 and 40, in prelude of what a lot of people, our top tier people, started figuring, we're going to be at war soon, and we better get stepped up for that. Meanwhile, FDR had been pushing, let's get the military ready, let's step up, even though he was getting against extreme blowback from from Congress at the time. So my grandparents were born in of the Depression era, and then grew up as young people, and during the era. My dad was almost 20 years older than my mother. So my mother married my father when she was 18. So he was 38, just got out of the Marine Corps. Had been out of the Marine Corps a short time, had got a job working for Firestone, Bridgestone now, but it was Firestone then. And you could live and raise a family on one person could have a job and bring enough money home to pay for the house, the welfare and needs of the family, all the utilities, and still have sufficient leftovers to invest in things like family vacations and toys, like campers and boats and things like this. All stuff that middle class America considers as normal, right? Now, there's a whole lot of not normal shit going on today, because that's something. We are so far down the road from where our grandparents was. Our grandparents would not be able to understand any of this today, and I begin to understand why a lot of elder people disconnect in their later years, because the world around them has become such an extremely radical place from what they knew as and grew up in. So our great-grandparents came through the Depression, and our grandparents are children of the Depression and children of World War II. So my father was not quite old enough to get drafted into World War II. He was 15, or 16 when the war came to an end. He instead got drafted and went to Korea, and then stayed in the military for damn near 20, almost 30 years, 20 some odd years, I think it was. So the our parents lived in a different era. Sometime in my generation, in the 80s, things start to go south. And it's a gradual, but it's a ramping up. It's becoming more apparent every year. And I honestly can say I trace it back to Reagan. President Reagan enacted a whole lot of changes that were geared to promote the wealthiest people in the country and big business at the expense of the majority of the country and the average American. And that's the God's truth, too. So this leads us to a whole slew of problems. So as a kid, my grandfather was a minister, but he was a mechanic. He tried to own his own mechanic shop. It didn't work so well. He worked for some other people. Meanwhile, he ran a church. It was never a big church, but it was his calling, and that was his passion. He also raised seven kids doing that, and grandma did not have a job except raise them damn seven kids and look after the seven kids. That was always been my understanding of how all that went around. So about my generation, we start looking at things, and your options are becoming more and more limited. My uncles went to the service, and then none of them went to college after that. A couple of them went to trade schools, but that's just it. Most of them came back from the service and were able to find really good blue-collar jobs that paid well. We're talking the late 50s, early 60s when this all happened. So by the time the 80s rolled around, I graduated high school in 1985, and the job market's already bad. The military, I went in to apply to the military, to the Navy actually, and the Navy turned me down because I was a little overweight. I weighed 230 pounds in 1985, and I was a little overweight. Now, what they didn't say was I didn't have outstanding, academics from school. My grades weren't so great. I had passing grades. If I liked a class, I passed it. Anything more than that. If I really enjoyed a class, rarely do I come across classes like history class. I loved history class so much that I aced the damn thing. Mostly I was bored by the stuff. I was bored by it or disconnected to it by other issues in my world. So, a whole slew of my peers, we have parents and grandparents who have a completely different worldview on how life should be on the personal scale. And they're starting to struggle, and they're getting increasingly frustrated. But these same people, the handful of people in my extended family that went to college, and I'm one of the very few, most of them did so without incurring massive debt, which happens now. You can't go to school today without ending up with a huge amount of debt unless you have the advantage of getting some kind of full run scholarship, which is rare. They're there, but they're not. Just not. Very few people get them in the numbers game. That's just very tiny. Or having a wealthy family that can pay your bills, pay your way. Otherwise, you end up with you'll probably spend a quarter of your working career trying to pay off your school debt. And it wasn't ever like that. This considerably changes the spending power. My own generation. So my generation gets it in the wallet. So we start seeing these massive school costs, where my aunts and uncles and stuff, when they decided to go to school, the school was actually paid for. You don't know about that, do you? Most Americans are not aware that college at the basic level was pretty much free back 50 years ago. You go back 50 years plus, and most of those schools of higher learning, you had fees, you had some fees you paid, you had some tuition you paid, but nothing on the scale that they have today. And when they talk about, well, they worked their way through college, well, I clerked for so-and-so, well, I went to school. That's because they were working a part-time job to have money to pay for basics like food and to go to the bar and have a beer, with their college buddies on Friday night. not because they needed to pay for the damn bill. And there's no working job in America a young American can get today that would ever make a dent in their college education expense. So when you talk about I had to work when I'm working and I'm going to college, I'm working. Yeah, you're working because you have no choice. But you can work and all the work you're going to do for the next 12 years is what it's going to take to pay your debt off. And that's bullshit. So you get this even larger group of people who are shied away from college because of the sheer cost of it. And like I said, in 1985, Reagan was in office. The military was actually downsizing. There's a lot of talk about Reagan, how Reagan ramped up the military. No, he ramped up military spending. Let's be clear about that. It went through the roof. This is what this big, massive $33 trillion debt America has today begins in Reagan's era. There was almost no debt when Carter left office. Not much in the way of debt. So this massive spending spree that the Republican Party, at the behest of President Reagan, which goes a long way to revamping our military and kicking it in the ass and getting it more modernized and making it what it is now. True, but the massive amount of spending gets put into this, and so at this point though, the services themselves are choosing to be extremely selective. They have the option of not taking every dumb Tom, Dick, and Jane that walks in the door. Unlike other eras. So when we get into Desert Shield and Desert Storm, we start, we're in Afghanistan for 20 years. Now we can't get enough people to volunteer, and we don't have a draft. What do? We cry. We cry, and we try to promote, and we try to encourage people. So we start developing this culture of uneducated, unmotivated, angry Americans. So my generation, I sat around with my cousins and my friends. I don't tell you how many times. This was afternoons. This was Sunday nights. This was, Saturday 3 in the morning, and we're drinking beer. We pillared, we acquired from someplace. We all had these conversations about what are we going to do, and why does it seem like the other side of town always got the better? Why is it they have it easier than we do? Why is it their kids are driving new cars, and we're driving whatever pieces pieces of POSs we can piece together? Why is it that so and so's girlfriend's working at a boutique on the far west side of town, making twice what we're making, swinging burgers or, in my case, freaking pizza for pizza? Why is that? Meanwhile, what do? Well, we don't know. We don't know what to do. And so some people start popping up and start pointing fingers at the other side, politically saying, oh, it's all their fault. This started a long damn time ago, and it keeps eating at people's heads and keep eating at people's heads. So we start to develop an entire generation of Beavis and Buttheads here. A lot of your current crazy MAGA types are Beavis and Butthead types from the 80s. It is what it is, man. I ain't even trying to make this shit up, right? So when you get this education becomes an asthma. It's priced out. So many Americans today cannot go to college. The only reason I went to college is because I got a retraining grant because the company I worked for we had a strike and they shut the doors. That's how I got my money to go to college, and it was 100% paid for by you, and I appreciate your effort. I do. American tax dollar money and money donated to the United Way. So it was a retraining program sponsored and funded by the government, operated through the United Way. And it paid 100% of my college expenses to go to college. And at that time, I went to college. I went 5 semesters and acquired an Associate of Applied Sciences degree in Computer-Aided Design, or CAD Tech. And about $9,000. It was about $9,000. So I went for a year and a half, 5 semesters back to back, because that was part of it. There was no semester breaks. You literally it was 7 hours a day. It was full-time school for almost 18 months. and I got this Associate of Applied Sciences degree. All I lacked was about 12 more months of educate. Another 3 semesters would have qualified me for the bachelor's degree. But I was not pushed it. Nobody told me about it. Nobody said it would be a good idea. I was all focused on what I got, and I think at the time they didn't care. All they cared was they got a body in the damn classroom, and they'll tell you whatever it is you want to hear. So I was not really suited for the position that I was taking college education for. And the things I were suited for, if the advisor had advised me better, I might have a completely different career. Well, no, I wouldn't be doing videos today bitching about being poor all the time. So when you start to downplay the education system. In the 80s, when I was in school in the 80s, there were laboratories and stuff in the science rooms that were shut down. And I'd heard stories from my older cousins. Oh, we used to do this and we used to do that. Well, they stopped doing them because they were expensive. The payback for what they felt, they weren't getting a lot of payback. So even then, a lot of the programs were being curtailed or downsized. We also had a lot more in the industries department in school. My high school had a really large shop, right? And it had everything from metalworking to woodworking, everything you could expect in a high school shop, but it was really big. And they actually had mechanic courses to teach you basic mechanic skills for working on motors, small motors and vehicles. Then there was welding classes where you could literally learn the steps you needed to learn how to weld and be certified to weld. And this was in high school. They had drafting back then. I didn't take any of those drafting classes because I was never encouraged to do so, and it involved math, and I didn't like math. But here, many years later, I went to college to be a drafter using computers. Would have been, if I'd had that earlier education, it would have benefited me in my job searches and things later. Meanwhile, they were already downsizing those programs in the 80s. From the time my grandkids, they don't have half those programs anymore. Most of them don't exist at all. And they don't have the staff for them, and they don't have the funding for them. And who's hurting here? And we're talking public schools, right? So if you go to a private schools have a lot more options and opportunities available to them because they have private money funding them. But they're not all the best out there. The worst part of private schools is the dogma agenda that's attached to them. What is it that makes the school private, and what is it that makes them different from the public school? That's what you need to ask yourself, and not for yourself and your own. Well, I'll never send my kids to public school or a private school. Fine, but shouldn't you know why your neighbors are? Why? Why did our governor of the state of Iowa agree to a $7,500 education voucher per student to go to a private school on the public dollar? What's the real agenda behind that? What's the real goal for it? So you get a whole generation of people that are really poorly read, poorly informed, undereducated. Then let's take the other element. Growing up as I did in rural Iowa, religion, Christian faith is extremely deep. It's a big part of life on many levels, and some of them are more extreme than others, but on the basic level, just about everybody went to church. If you ever watched the Waltons, everybody went to church but Dad. Old man Walton didn't go. Grandpa went, but his son didn't, because his son went to World War I and fought in the trenches and saw some horrific stuff that he could never reconcile himself with, and him and God decided to have an understanding. He was never setting foot in a damn church again. And they never explained it past that. But it was obviously a very risque thing for the era and the TV series and the story or the message that the TV series was pushing. Right? I loved the TV series as a kid because in part it just reminded me of what I considered a simpler version of what I was raised up in. So the same thing goes down. You get this poorly educated, and then you double down with religion. So my grandfather was a minister. My grandmother was legally registered to be a minister. Two of my uncles, Two of my aunts are ministers. I've got one cousin, I think, that's a minister. In addition to that, you were around church. So even when we didn't attend Grandpa's church, we went to the local Christian church because the mom insisted on it. So we went until I was 14 or 15, and then mom decided at that point she was done fighting me to go, and she just said, I would hope you will do the right thing and just go. And I never set foot again in church and again after that. And I have my own reasons for it, because to me the church is an entity. It's a body and not a faith. It's not the faith. It is not the end all, the beat all of the Christian faith. There's something I share in common with old man Walton there. He had his beliefs in God, and he had made his peace with his beliefs in God, and he wasn't going to shove them down anybody else's throat. So be it. Anyway. So you get this double tier system. So the lack of education gets replaced by a quite marginalized education that's very narrow-minded. Racism is not something you're born into. You're not born a racist. That's just truthful. You're not born. A human being is not born a racist. I don't care what anybody likes to think. No, you are indoctrinated into being racist. You're raised up in a racist environment, whether it's subtle or overt, doesn't matter. Our mindset is affected by all the things that are around us and how our peers and our elders think and operate. That's just nature. The younger we are, the more impressionable we are to what our seniors think and do. And it carries over in the long run, right? So you get a whole slew of people who are getting poor education, and now we've got an increasingly isolated group of these people. A large portion of the Republican Party today, the Republican base, the conservative base in America, has disconnected from reality. And they disconnected from reality in tiny increments, and they have been doing so for most of their lives. Because they get over and over and over again, they feel frustrated and angry and annoyed, and traditionally our leadership keeps pointing fucking fingers at the other side while doing the very things that we accuse the other side of doing. And you know what? The Democrats do the same crap, just not as much of it, and they're a little slicker. But at the end of the day, it's the same bullshit. So, my family grew up on the east side of Des Moines. My parents chose to move in 1972 even further east and to a small town outside of town, about 10, 12 miles outside of town. So it's about a 30-minute drive from my hometown to the main part of the city, which is just a commute. Most people who commute that is nothing. And it was nothing to us. We didn't think about it until the price of gas started really to fucking go up. And it really started to become noticeable. But when I was a young man at 16, 18 years old, when gas was less than $1 a gallon, you could drive there. It was not uncommon to make 2 or 3 trips in one day. Make that hour round trip several times a damn day. Because all of our jobs, we all got jobs in town. We all did our shopping in town. Matter of fact, the local grocery store closed up because they opened up a bigger grocery store and a Walmart in the next town over, and everybody just went there. That's the nature of how things go. So that's why gasoline is such a crucial component of most Americans' life these days. If you're outside the city, if you live in the deep city and you don't have a car, or you're not dependent on your car, you really have no clue as to just how handicapped the average American is. Well, I could take a bus. You didn't take buses. There was no bus running from my small town to Des Moines. You didn't take a bus. You had to have wheels. Either somebody else took you, which meant they made twice as many trips, because if your mom had to take you to work and then she went home and then she came back and got you, so she's making that trip twice, where you'd have made it once because if you'd had your own car, and that's what makes our love with automobile also such a problem in the long term, right? So the east side of Des Moines was considered lower middle class for many years. The rest of my family lived down by the state fairgrounds, which is also lower middle class and low class, because you go south of the fairgrounds and you get into the southeast bottoms, and I had family living down there too. And so my father, we would have been lower middle class. Dad was making $16 an hour in 1970 money, and that's damn good money. Mom did not have to work. Dad could afford to support both her and him, so they both had cars. They both had gas. My sister and I, we didn't lack for the basics. We didn't have a whole lot of spectacular fancy stuff. You know, we didn't get cable until 83 or 84, where our relatives in town had it since the 70s. And, you know, we didn't have air conditioning in our house. There was no such thing as central air. It wasn't until I got 18 and put an AC in the window and had a 3-day brawl with my dad over it that I broke that habit. It wasn't long after that more air conditioners showed up in my folks' house. But the house itself did not have central air. Now I have a house and it bloody well has central air, because my experiences growing up without it, you know, and that same mindset takes its toll on people, and it gets into you. So your world gets even smaller. So many MAGA people today live in tiny little circles, and they're so compressed in their circle, and they're surrounded generally by similar people. So it's very easy for them to be misled, and doubly so because their youth and the lack of a decent education and a proper education in some aspects of the encouraging to, you know, part of education is to encourage yourself to want to continue to educate yourself. That's the thing that kills me. Look, I'm 57 years old and I still try to learn new shit. I still try to keep a bigger, broader view of the world, and try to at least keep an open mind, try to understand what's going on in a given situation. There are times when I just I'll look at, the wife will ask me, so I'll look and say, I have no fucking clue what these people are thinking or doing. That don't make any damn sense whatsoever under any circumstances. And you can only say it so often, so much, because people don't want to hear it. So you get this entire generation of Beavis and Buttheads, and most of these Beavis and Buttheads are now in Congress, are reaching that age limit. You know, some of the asinine behavior that we see in Congress today, in Washington today, is based off of this same kind of behavior that was okay as we were young people. And this is what we grew up into. And we grew up even more, ever more frustrated with the facts that no matter what we do and no matter how hard we work, we seem to still be backsliding. Everything costs far more than it did 10 years ago. Everything. Except what we get paid. And a lot of us get paid far better than we did 10 years ago, but we still are far behind the wheel. Meanwhile, the same corporations are racking in massive fucking yearly damn profits. And then people are like, well, you know, really? You know what? Perhaps if you want to be on the stock exchange in America, perhaps it ought to be a law that every member of your crew, everybody that works for you, is given shares, the same damn shares you are. You know, that's another thing they don't talk about. And I'm not a specialist in any of that kind of stuff, because I've only had a handful of stocks in my lifetime, and they didn't do squat because I didn't have the money to buy enough of them for it to matter. So they talk about people, well, you can invest in this and you can invest in that. Great. How? If you're lucky and Grandpa dies and leaves you $100,000 and you really are willing to bite the bullet and you invest that $100,000, now you're talking. But if you're going to talk about a guy who's working at McDonald's and making $14 an hour, and you wanted to put, what, $20 a week away into an investment plan that he's not going to see a return on until he's in his 70s? That's hard. That's extremely hard for people, working people even more so. And people who are living on the margin, all but impossible to do. This is what made Social Security so damn important, because they take the money from you regardless what your financial situation is. If you got a paycheck, they take in their Uncle Sam is getting his piece of that. And at the end of the day, you get that back. It's not entitlement. It's not something that it's owed to us in the way that some people would spend it up as. You took my money, I want my money back. You took my money so you would look after me when I get old. That was the caveat and agreement to that. That's not negotiable. So when I hear these people talking about, if Trump loses again, if he loses in 2024, there's going to be blood in the streets. Going to be lock and load, baby. He's going to be lock and load. We got to do something. See, there's so many of them that are so convinced that that's what they have to do, but yet they themselves are not motivated enough to actually put that into motion. It's you got to watch for the individuals who do, right? And we were lucky that they were incompetent. They were hacks and they were incompetent. And they were half-assed and they weren't very serious in it. So like the Jan 6 crap, all the elements were there. Things could have went much worse, much more bloody, much more destructive. We could literally be under a dictatorship right now had better leadership been involved, had better planning been involved, had better resolve been in place. If those peacekeepers and oath keepers and flim-flam artists and whatever the fuck those other militia groups that were present at the time had coordinated and brought heavy weaponry, had brought their weapons with the intent of using them and stormed the damn Capitol, the Capitol in force, in the mob, with firepower, things have been grossly different in this country. And it still potentially could be that way, in part. Because there are some savvy, intelligent people on that side of the fence too. So when we hear about them talking about vetting people that they're going to put into government when they take into government, if they take office next, take that bloody seriously, because that's how democracy dies. Yeah, that's how it dies. And that's how Beavis and Butthead took over America. Till next time, my friends. Till next time. All right, let's do a test. Let's just make sure we got some sound. Everything is going copacetic. I don't know, something about that headphone.